What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the idea of a genealogical Adam and Eve. So I don't have a problem with holding a Judeo-Christian view of the world and believing in evolution, but I also don't have a problem believing in a genealogical Adam and Eve and still believing in science, because with the Human Genome Project, we have proved that we did come from a common ancestor. So saying that, I don't have a problem with reading Genesis 1 chronologically, like this creation event happened and then later this separate creation event happened. Like God created man by speaking them into existence in Genesis 1, and then in Genesis 2, God created a separate group of people in the Garden of Eden through dirt and breathing life into them. I don't have a problem with that, but also I don't have a problem with a zoomed in view. So you're reading Genesis 1 as a creation event and then Genesis 2 as a zoomed in view of that same creation event. Moderns know the idea of race being biologically determined and detectable is a flawed modern concept. And Dr. Swamidas is an expert in genetics, so he knows the idea is nonsense. And in chapter 4, he specifically debunks the idea on the basis of science. And in that chapter, he says we are all linked together in the recent past by genealogical ancestry. He says the human race is one family, one race, not multiple different races. So Swamidas's work works only if it's correct that there were people outside of the garden. So he's presenting his thesis in concert with pre-Adamism. And that idea stretches back to the 5th century BCE. And it was married to the idea that there were other worlds before this one. Now in his biography of Isaac La Pereire, the 17th century French theologian, lawyer credited with or blamed for vaulting pre-Adamism into the religious intellectual battle over the discovery of people in the wake of the European exploration. Richard Popkins points out there's primary source evidence as early as the 2nd century CE for Christians debating pagans about the existence of civilizations far older than biblical chronology seemed to allow. So how is this argued? The only reasonable argument for people outside of the garden comes from Genesis 4, from the story of Cain and Abel, and Cain being afraid to go outside of the garden because the people might kill him. So Cain, after hearing about his punishment, laments, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me away from the ground. I shall be hidden, I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." Just face value of reading that, if you're just looking at what the text says after Cain killed his brother Abel, we only really have Cain, because Abel's dead, and Adam and Eve. That's the human population at a face value reading. So who in the world is Cain afraid of? Who are these other people that might kill him? Now the verse 14, does seem to imply that there could be people outside of Cain's tight family that could hear of his awful deed and kill him on sight. When Cain says today, the Hebrew is hayom, "You have expelled me," and then he worries about his fate, there is an immediacy of the threat that is assumed. A few verses later in 16 and 17, Cain settles in the land of Nod east of Eden, where he meets a woman, marries her, and then builds a city. That, of course, brings us into another question of where did Cain get his wife? And follows that query with another, how could Cain build an entire city by himself? So this immediacy that we see in Cain's words when he speaks led some people to believe that there must have been humans outside of the genealogical line of Adam and Eve. This reading of Genesis 4 takes advantage of chronological ambiguities. We are given no chronology in the passage. The ambiguities are also its own encumbrance. The people outside Eden approach to Genesis 4 assumes a tight chronology between Cain's expulsion and the encounter he fears, therefore subverting the argument on the other side that other people required by the narrative must come from Adam and Eve. But hayom, again the Hebrew word read today, can be read with an equal conjecture to presume that today is to be contrasted with the verbs shall be a fugitive and will kill Cain. In this reading, a long stretch of time between the expulsion and the threat feared by Cain is assumed. With respect to that time period, the statement of Genesis 5:4 is brought to bear that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters, and this allows that his potentially lethal enemies, his future wife and the necessary co-workers in city building, to come in fact from Adam and Eve and their subsequent children. So the question is, should we marry hayom today with the imperfect future time verb forms, or divorce them? Divorce those two features of the text, and that is a matter of hermeneutical preference. As a result, we have a textual uncertainty that creates an interpretive opening for people outside the garden, but that's all it is. Let's talk about some dead-end defenses. While Genesis 4 at least gives us a possibility to ponder, other so-called biblical arguments that seem to bolster the idea of people outside the garden do not. They are internally inconsistent with respect to the early chapters of Genesis, or otherwise have no merit. For example, one speculation is that the term Adam might allow for two separate lineages, one outside the garden and one inside. Technically, when Adam is prefixed with the definite article in Hebrew, ha-Adam, or with the preposition la-Adam, the term should not be interpreted as a proper Hebrew name according to Hebrew grammar. Translations such as humankind, the man, or that man are appropriate when you have the article. When Adam lacks the article, the term may be a proper personal name, Adam or not. Besides the personal name, the term may be translated as indefinite, a man, or still generically, humankind. For our purposes, this variability has raised the question whether the early chapters of Genesis may be reread for two human lines, one deriving from genetic or indefinite Adam, the other from personal name Adam. This argument is part of a wider theological consideration. It has long been noted that Adam's story has strong parallels to the story of Israel. The import of the observation is that it allows the postulate, as Israel was an elect subset of humanity, the corporate Son of God according to Exodus 4:23 and Hosea 11:1, so might Adam be an elect subset of a wider humanity. Whatever coherence the Adam-Israel analogy might have, applying that to the question of people outside of Eden is unsustainable. The two Adam strategies undermined by Genesis 5, specifically 1 through 3, where we are provided with the genealogical lineage of Adam, no definite article there. This genealogy is not just any man, nor generic humanity, but Adam. Genesis 5, 1b through 2 takes this form. Adam without the article, and then it links to Genesis 1, 26 and 27, where humans are created bara, in the image of God, or as the image of God, which is a rendering based on a point of Hebrew grammar and syntax that leads you to take the functional view of the image that refers to a status, not an equality or attribute. And that view aligns with Dr. Swamidas' hypothesis, but at any rate, we have a linkage between Genesis 5:1 and 2 back to Genesis 1:26 and 27. In Genesis 5:3, we get the lifespan of Adam, again without the articles, so Adam. Point is that in Genesis 5:1 through 3, we see that the writer uses Adam without the article to refer to both the person Adam and broader humanity that extends from Adam and Eve. So assuming that one textual form points to non-Adamic humans cannot stand. So Dr. Swamidas also mentions appeals to Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the episode of sons of God, daughters of men, the Nephilim. Some posit that the sons of God, or the godly line of Adam, continued via Seth in Genesis 5, and the daughters of men are some less godly humans. The Nephilim produced by the Forbidden Union are not giants or anything else unusual, so this view argues Nephilim comes from Hebrew Nephal, which means fallen ones as in evil people, or those who fall upon as in warriors. Swamidas notes this perspective because he doesn't base his hypothesis, this idea, and that's a good thing as none of these presumptions stand scrutiny. There's no textual or contextual merit. This passage explains a relation between the supernatural and natural realm and how it produced demigods, giants, and ultimately demons. It is firmly rooted in Mesopotamian antecedent literature and has clear relationships to Second Temple Jewish texts, repurposed in the New Testament. The scholarly literature establishing all of those assertions is copious. So Romans 5 is the passage that launched LaPierre's thinking in regards to pre-Adamites. As by one man sin entered into the world, and by sin death, so likewise death had power over all men, because in him all men sin. Till the time of the law sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed when the law was not. But death reigned from Adam into Moses, even upon those who had not sinned according to the similitude of the transgressions of Adam, who is the type of the future. Now the key line for LaPierre in this regard was, for till the time of the law sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed when the law was not, or when it didn't exist. LaPierre interpreted the passage to say that the law came into the world with Adam, by which he meant natural law that preceded the law of Moses. How could one call an act sin if there were no law? The act would require a willful transgression against. The language must speak of willful acts against an order by intelligent willful transgressors, and consequently LaPierre reasoned there was sin before Adam, but it only took on moral significance with Adam. Therefore, there must have been men before Adam. Now, contemporary biblical scholars of all theological persuasions, or none, will immediately recognize the weaknesses of these arguments. But that doesn't really matter to us because Swamidas is not depending on Romans 5. If Dr. Swamidas' hypothesis is correct, is there a violation of the meaning of Romans 5:12 through 14? And in that regard, the central point is verse 12. I'm going to read from ESV. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all sin. Now the verse seems to disallow people before Adam. It clearly states that Adam's sin brought death into God's world. If there were people before Adam, did they not die? If these people could die, how are they really people? Can they not sin? If they couldn't sin, it would be impossible to say that they're God's imagers. The image, as saying something is made in God's image, has something to do with consciousness and moral responsibility. And this is especially important for the functional view. Romans 5 seems to push the idea that humans created before Adam could not be feasible. But that's a premature conclusion. We know from elsewhere in Romans 5 that Paul is talking about Adam. So he has the sin of Genesis 3 in view, the first sin of humankind. There's no ambiguity in that point. Saying sin came into the world through one man can only refer to what happened in Eden. The phrase "and death through sin" doesn't have anything to do with any death of any human or animal before the fall. It has to do with circumstances in Eden and after the fall. Death now invades the Adamic storyline and will affect all of Adam and Eve's descendants. In Eden there was no death, the original desire of God, there was no death. Now, you will see some rabbis that will argue that God's intent was for Adam and Eve to actually eat the apple. Even though he said not to eat it, he also implied when you do eat it, you will surely die. So saying you will eat it, even though I'm saying not to. Some rabbis will argue that the Nakash, the snake or the shining one, wasn't doing anything wrong. What he said was true, that they did become more like God when they ate the fruit. So the story is talking about a physical death, but it's also talking about a spiritual death. Because they didn't die immediately when they ate the fruit. They spiritually died. They were separated from God, so eventually their bodies would die. But it's talking about a physical and a spiritual death. And their children will die, which includes all of humanity. So it doesn't actually talk about guilt falling to all men, but it just talks about death. So maybe all men have to sin in order to be guilty. The Swamidas hypothesis is workable. Romans 5:12 does not need to violate Genesis 1, 2, or 3. So God created Adam and Eve de novo, stepping into an experiment to create a world filled with embodied life. So there's nothing that's fatal to this, but there's also not biblical support. This is part 1 to a video series. There will be more videos like this on the same topic, citing lots of different scholars on the topic. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of content and you're on Instagram, leave a like, comment, and a follow. If you're on YouTube, leave a like, comment, and also subscribe, hit the bell, and thanks for watching.